Now we're going to talk about setting band clearance in servo. This is a huge important thing. Your band clearance is going to affect the quality of your second shift, your fourth gear shift, the timing on the 3/4, and the timing on the 2/1. There's a lot of timing involved here, and the clearance is only a small part of actually getting your unit to function as it should, much better than GM designed. The factory clearance is quite a bit on the band. It is a ton. I want to say it's 180, 1.80. It's an ass load. That's probably wrong. That seems like a lot. Maybe it's 180 thousandths. Just that number sticks in my head. It is a ton. It will not be near as tight as setting an aftermarket servo or a wide band. It's just the nature of the beast. The only way you could is, this is one of the longest pins they make. There is a 3-ring, a 2-ring, and a 1-ring. Okay, we're using a 3 today. It is OEM. There are extra long Sonax, and you're more than welcome to take your TIG welder and weld some on it. I encourage a clearance roughly as thick as your snap ring. That's the easiest way I can tell you to do it. There's geometry at play here on circumferences and radiuses and strokes that may be a little difficult for the average Joe to understand. It's really not important if you are the average Joe, so don't worry about it. This is more of a performance builder thing to worry about things like that. But what's going to happen as the average Joe is, you may grind or add some material on this pin. If you take away just, we'll say a 1/16, you actually may take away a whole inch, which is a little bit of an exaggeration, but a whole inch of grab in radius around the drum. So a little bit here in short goes a long way with the band. Tech heads and builders, if you want to talk real specific, give me a call. But for the average guy, let's not worry and get too in depth with that. So we'll just remember a little bit on the tip is going to equal a whole lot of clearance around. Just keep that in mind. So don't go nuts. Don't grind it all the way down, because if you ruin this, you are effed. Our clearance is probably going to be a little looser than what I'm used to building performance units all the time, but we are going to make it much better in GM, as good as the average guy could, and we'll say without a welder, just for you guys at home. We have our band in, and what we're going to do is put the Corvette servo and stock fourth gear together. Okay, Corvette servos will work with aftermarket force and all that. You just follow the instructions for the aftermarket part you are using, but there is no compatibility issue. You will have a Teflon ring kit, which is what I recommend. I'd stay away from D-ring kits. O-rings on a servo produce drag, throws off timing, no bueno. Teflon, good, real easy. These rings are very tight. There are solid, there are scarf cut. Today I'm using scarf cut, and the theory behind scarf cut is if your bore is a little wider than it should be, in other words, throwing a hot dog down a hallway, this seal, as fluid pushes it, will spread this gap. And this gap goes quite a ways. It can go all the way up to here and still seal. See how far that's overhanging? That's the benefit of these Teflon rings. They close gaps. Solid rings, they're cool and shit if you got something new that actually isn't totally blown out. You got something old, you want to keep going? Scarf cut. You want to prevent failures? Scarf cut. These kits have all the rings you would need for multiple servos. So we put our largest one around our third gear accumulator, and our small one around the base of it. Now to finish our third gear accumulator, just like our other accumulators, this is spring loaded. Some people block this off. It's the only accumulator that is safe to block off, in my opinion. At the same time, it doesn't really do much. The spring in here is a badass bastard, and there's not a whole lot of room for this to travel anyway, so kind of pointless. Do it if you'd like. Not really going to hurt or help you, but if it makes you feel better, by all means. I'm going to briefly use a spring compressor. This is sort of self-explanatory. Simply, it's a little hard with your thumbs. Push the cap down and get the snap ring seated. And a little screwdriver will help you do just that. It's very quick, very easy. The cap will move a little bit. You may struggle putting your pin through here, but that is its purpose. This pin's meant to center it anyway. If that happens, you can move the cap. So what we're going to do now is just take our time, find our happy place. Oh, almost. Just feel it. Do not gouge, do not rush. Walk it in, and it should slide right through, okay? Easy. If you've gouged this, you definitely want to clean that up. Maybe even get a new piece. It will cause sticking. This should, be a very tight fit, but it should slide very easily. The next piece we're going to install is the actual second gear apply piston for the band. And typically the ring for this in your kit is going to be green or red. Doesn't really matter. They just make them different colors. And you're going to put that right over that Teflon seal like so. Next here, I got a new spring. There are stiffer, there are less lands, there are all kinds of springs out there. It really just applies to the setup, how fast you want this to pull back. That's things you'll get to learn in your profession as a builder, how to work this stuff and make it all work for whatever build you are using. Right now, you've pulled this out, you want to get it back in, and you're good to go. Retaining washer, snap ring clip, E-clip is what we call it. And it should return and extend very easily. So that's our second gear. Here is our second gear return spring, pretty much overall, and that's going to go there. Fourth gear, we have, I believe it's this guy. No, it is not. It is this guy. We have our scarf cut sealing ring. And the cool thing about this piston is it doesn't really matter which way it goes in. To help you with clearance, you can flip it. So as you can see, one side is further than the other. Be aware, this will change fourth gear stroke as opposed to second gear stroke. And all we're going to do is simply maybe throw a little grease in there in this fourth gear cup. And this is your fourth gear piston. Okay, this is stock. I'm going to put it this way. Just to kind of see this really, yeah, we're gonna try this. I want to get it maybe as tight as we can go, so a little bit there may help us. Quite simply, this is the assembly, and it should have a little bit of room between the fourth and the second gear piston. So that is a Corvette servo. You can buy these pretty much pre-assembled if you're a little leery still on it, and or you can just put it together and save yourself a ton of money, because they certainly aren't worth $100. I will say that. So what we're going to do now is we're going to leave our fourth gear O-ring off and check our band clearance, or we're going to be ruining a lot of fourth gear O-rings. We're going to come around to the servo and take a peek inside, finish setting this, and move on to the rest of the assembly. Alright, so the first thing to do, grease up the servo bore. You've already inspected the inner workings of it earlier when you did the case. Your servo return spring just sets very kindly on the pin bore, and then very gently put the second gear servo in the pin bore. Should be a relatively good tight fit. You shouldn't have any slop or anything like that. And you shouldn't really have much resistance either. Then we're going to install our fourth gear with no sealing ring first, just to see where we are at. Now, you can imagine you need to be having, roughly 3 to 4 hands to do this. Well, that's where Mr. Irwin comes in. These are available at your local hardware store, and you can put a hand on the band, make sure it's centered, keep squeezing. Gosh, it makes it a one-man job. Look at that. And what I recommend here, don't be scared of this. You're not going to rip the band in half. The thing isn't made of glass. What we want to do is make sure we're actually seated, lined up. So I want to take a dead blow and very lightly just tap on the piston. It only takes a couple. Now, just judging myself, I think I'm actually going to be a touch on the tight side, or I might be absolutely perfect. It's a very close call. I feel like I'm going to be a touch on the tight side, actually. What I'm looking for is the snap ring groove versus the cap retaining curve right there. And I want my clearance on the band stroke to be about this thick. So what I'm going to do actually is I'm going to, believe it or not, flipping that piston does change things. I'm going to turn that around. I need a little more out of it. Wow, look at that difference. Huge. I gained a whole 1/16. Now I think that for an OEM unit is going to be a very proper clearance. What I like to see on servo placement, servo ring placement, you want your snap ring opening in the 9 to 11 o'clock position. Simply take your screwdriver and give it a twist. Go around in a triangle, 3 points of contact, and we're going to release. And I'm going to say at this point in time, we probably have something very close to what OEM clearance is, which is cool. I want you guys to see that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my pick here and I'm going to move this back and forth. As you can see, this is what your clearance people think is, and it is to a degree. But that's not the rest of it. What I'm going to do now is perform an air check. And simply, this hole here is second gear, and this hole here straight in is fourth gear. And then you have right below it your third accumulator capsule check ball, which you should have blown out earlier. Fourth gear is different stroke than second gear. This is the release for the overall servo in fourth. If you have silicone this shut like a typical hillbilly, then you will definitely 100% burn your band up so quickly and have a very strange shifting problem and or bind up, or both. Silicone is bad. If you must use silicone, avoid this. This is all anybody asks. It's there. So, and actually, I really like what I see. What we are looking for, and this is how you can really tell clearance. When I talked about geometry earlier, we want to look at how far the pin travels, not so much what the rest of this is doing. So our pin is traveling roughly the length of that clip, which is about 1/8 to 3/32, or 3/16, I mean. That's a beautiful quick grab for something OEM. And honestly, with a wideband, that's what I'd like to see too. Just a teensy bit tighter for a racing application. This is going to release a little faster than the third clutch. It will help with that weird overlap you guys get when you make that temporary fourth and that surge happens. I'm sure you all know what I'm talking about. Everybody's experienced it with a 4L60. With a PerformaBuilt, we correct a lot of these slushy feelings. Now that we have a beautiful band clearance, also what's important, this reverse drum should spin just like this without any help doing this. That's how you know it's great. Primo clearance right here. And we pop our snap ring out with a screwdriver and we are ready to seal this up. So all we're gonna do is put our final blue ring around it. now that we've verified our band clearance. Reinstall our snap ring, again in the 9, 10, 11-ish clock position. If you install it over here or close to one of these, you will blow the entire servo bore out. The aluminum cannot take it. So a good rule to follow in automatics, if there's a space in some metal, some casting, and it requires a snap ring, never put the opening towards it. It will flex and blow. Make sure your band pin does not fall out in this process. Push it in, re-verify, and we're gonna do a little bit of both. So I'm gonna show you guys second gear. About a clip length, nice and tight. And here's fourth gear. It's a little bit longer of a stroke. It may not be much to the untrained eye, but it is there. And it's something to account for. And that is adjustable within the servo assembly. Many aftermarket ones will tell you how to do that. Something to follow their directions. We have our own way here. But OEM, this is how you would do it. And my trick to you would be flipping the piston back and forth, because you can gain or lose a whole lot. And or TIG weld if you don't want to follow that advice. If you are installing a Corvette servo in the vehicle, what you are going to do is the pump will be in here, and you can pop this out with a pry bar against your tunnel and everything. It's fairly easy to get to. If you have an exhaust, sorry, you're probably going to have to take it off. What you want to look at is definitely drop the pan when you're doing this. And what we are looking for is right through this hole. And as you can see, you can't see the pin, but you can see the two band tabs. You can see how tight this is. And that's going to tell you a whole lot, because you definitely don't want your servo install and your band pin too long smashed up against this. That's going to be a bad install. You're going to be disappointed in your new performance part. You're not going to have a good time. My advice to you is reuse your stock pin. If your band's good, the length is there, it's already not going to be too tight, and that's the danger zone. Too loose is another danger zone, but I think people make it tighter than looser sometimes. So in the vehicle, drop the pan, look through your filter slot, and you can see that area, and it will give you a much better guideline than simply guessing and throwing it in there, because it's not a bolt-on part. Something needs checked. That's how you do it in a vehicle. Moving on to the pump. We're going to drop that in, but first, we are going to line the pump up, something we talked about earlier. Some pumps do not use an O-ring. That's okay. Personally, I like those because they drop in easier. I picked the hard one because I want to show you really just, things to not freak out over. There is resistance, obviously, when putting this in. We go back to our hole, and this is also where our speed handle and 13mm is going to come in. And there's ways to align a pump. There's tools out there that are useless and expensive. But I'm going to show you guys the free, easy, painless PerformaBuilt way. So, we want our bolts in, but we want them loose. We want our halves to slack back and forth. You can do it one of two ways. You can put the pump in the case and slap it around and be careful pulling it out. It usually lines up. But what we're doing is we're paying attention down in these bolt holes. The face, not the back, the face has a much thicker casting on it. It overlaps. You can see that in every single hole. And all we're doing is checking our edges and checking our bolt holes, pushing and pulling. Give it a tap. Make sure, as you can see how sensitive that was. Messed up everything I did. So make sure it's all even. Just go over it. And you'll know, and you have so many chances to play with this, because it's either going to be perfect and go in, or it's not. If it's not, just pull it out and start over. It's not too bad. Once we use our 7 or how many senses do we got? 5 or 7. Once we use our human senses and actually pay a little attention, focus, not on our iPhone or iPad, just touch and feel, and we got a very flush area. Now, what I like to do is just give these a little twist all by themselves. And we're going to give 2 or all bolts just a little quick zap. We're going to keep firm tension. And I have my gun on 1, so put your gun on very light if it has a setting like that. Okay. And what we're going to do now is I have a convenient hole drilled in my desk for torquing. Trust me, those bolts, once they're knocked, your halves won't move, and you will be free to torque this down. The torque spec for the front and back of the pump is 18 foot-pounds. That is it. No more, no less. And use a star pattern. Cut our old rings off. You can use solid. Again, in this instance, I prefer to use scarf. It is my preference as well as yours. If you are using scarf though, and you've done your bushings like a good builder, then this, I highly recommend you grease up this groove, because the bushing and scarf cut are about to make you hate your life. This is a very touchy thing to do. It does definitely require you to take your time. But what this will do is it'll help keep the scarf cut in the groove rather than being clipped on our extremely tight bushing. And trust me, that's easier to do than not. The solid ring is great and all, but for longevity, I like these scarf cuts so much. And they really don't wear, these blue ones. These are probably the best thing they've ever come out with. We just want to make sure those are nice and tight. We definitely don't want any overhang. Then we have our washer here. These typically are always fine. We have a pretty nice one. Like I said, this unit was a very nice core, not a huge deal at all. So what we're gonna do, and a good thing to do before you go doing all this, is in your prep before, you should have checked your bushings on your input shaft and stuff like that. We have our O-ring. Some do not require an O-ring. Some require a wedge seal, which you do put on after. We're just gonna run some grease around this. Make sure we have the easiest time possible. Moving into the case, you don't need to grease up the entire pump bore here, just the top, just enough for the O-ring. The O-ring is going to pull the grease down. Just get the bevel and just a couple dabs on your pressure lands here for fluid, just to help keep the gasket in place. And this only goes on one way. Just match the shapes. You know, circle goes in a circle hole, triangle goes in a triangle slot, that kind of thing. All right, what we're going to do now is simply drop a pump in. The way I like to do this is with the help of that Phillips head that's been laying on my desk all this time. We put it up over. Use a bolt hole, any bolt hole. It's just a guide. And right now, you're actually seeing me. That's how tight these rings are. And this is all you need to do. See how it's sunk? Okay. We have made it past both rings, and that is remarkable on your first try, actually. And it feels good when you do it. Trust me, at home when you do this, just little taps. You shouldn't need to use a hammer or nothing like that. If you've sandwiched those rings and done your bushings properly, you'll have little taps, it'll go right in. Right now what we're sitting on is simply the O-ring right on that land, as you can see here. If you've made it to that O-ring, don't be scared anymore about clipping those rings. You've made it past the gauntlet. At this point, we can either tap the pump in with a dead blow or carefully screw it down with the bolts. I prefer tapping it because it lets me feel how well it's going if I've lined it up right. Clearly I have, or we probably wouldn't have made it this far. What I'm doing now is I'm putting my pump bolt O-rings, which are very important, on my pump bolts. There's little tiny O-rings. There are 7. You want to throw it on over the fret threads and tuck it up in that groove. You do not want it hanging off the groove. If you screw it down, you pinch it, you install this thing, you will have a fluid leak from there. And I couldn't tell you what's more annoying than having a problem on a part that costs about a penny. Even if you're tapping, I suggest you screw in your bolts. It really does help guide it. And like I said, you can use the impact very gently or very lightly, keep pressure on it and hit. Just tap. And we are fully seated. That couldn't have been any more painless, right? That's what we get when we're laid back, thinking clearly, and just taking our time. Now, what we're gonna do is just cheat, drive these down. I'm not giving it 3 ugga-duggas. No ugga-duggas, boys. Instead, we are going to do 18 foot-pounds, just like we did the backside, in a star pattern. Okay, we have 18 foot-pounds all around. And the very last thing would be our lockup O-ring. If you do not have lockup, one of the major things people do right away is they'll shove their converter on here and they will clip this. You will probably have a partial lockup or slipping lockup, something to check if you're a shop or a person that just doesn't have the most confidence in what they're doing. At this point, we are going to move on to the valve body. Now the valve body, fairly simple to put together, requires a little bit of savvy. There is one check ball that goes right there. That is extremely important. Put that there. It will make second gear shift hard as hell if you do not. That can or cannot be there. That is for reverse, and you should have checked your low reverse clutch pack earlier, so that way you don't have to undo everything you just did. But you should have a, 60 to 70 thousandths clearance there. Fourth gear. We're going to talk about this little trick. Your fourth gear is going to be this spring, this piston, and that pin and this seal. Now, OEM, the fourth gear accumulator, goes this way. It's fairly soft. There's nothing wrong with how that's done. You may put it that way, which we are. This way also works, and it firms it up. It is a very well-known mod, very easy thing to do. Simply install the entire assembly upside down. It's only healthier results. The other way is to do away with this altogether. There's a lot of people that plug both these holes. They're simply connecting holes, and this is also a very well-known mod. I have no issue with people doing. This is a great mod because not only does it firm up fourth the same way as this, it also supplies lube to the rear train in all gears and not just fourth. So it's only healthy. I discourage doing it with a check ball. That is sloppy. Use a set screw. I believe it's 1/4 by 20, and thread that in there in case, you know, have courtesy to other people in case somebody wants to put it back, or if you want to put it back and you don't like it. But those are 3 different ways to do it. And all we're going to do out of our kit is put our lathe seal on, our pin in the hole. We're going to grease up our bevel, and we are going to put it in the OEM way. The other thing is, check your pin bore and piston bore. Make sure they are nice and tight. This one was actually really nice, which I'm surprised. They usually aren't, and that's why I'm suggesting the mod that instead of finding a new piece and being worried about it, you can flip it or throw it out. If the pin wars bore, throw it out, plug the hole. You'll have a much better mod anyway. Putting the valve body together, we have our completed separator plate, which simply goes on with the screen side down. Your fourth accumulator spring will push up on this a little bit. Everybody, all the wonderful builders in the world and super smart people have bitched at me for not having alignment dowels. I use bolts, and you probably will too at home. These are the proper alignment holes. Okay, over here for the first one for the pressure manifold switch, and over here for the very corner. They do look different. This is tight, this is elongated. The only reason we are using those at the moment is to make sure the gasket does not shift or move or anything like that as we tighten it down. We're just simply installing our plate, retaining plate, and our 1-2 accumulator that we previously worked on in an earlier section. The valve body section, if you've missed that, go see. This is where you can adjust your shifts a little more easily on the 1-2 as well with the transmission still in the vehicle. It's simply 3 10mm bolts, and be adventurous. Play around with the springs. Find out what they do. I think you'll really have a good time. Sometimes the unknown is very fun for some people. Other times it's not. So we are going to just firm it up with our impact, and you will need a 10mm and an 8mm for the rest of this section. And the torque spec throughout the valve body is going to be 8 foot-pounds through and through. No ifs, ands, or buts. At this point, since you've tightened down your bolts, your valve body's not really going to move or anything. Reset your torque wrench from 18 to 8 and give it a tighten. These bolts cannot take much more than 8. They will start stressing out at that point. We move on to our 8s. There's no particular order right now. No real sequence to follow. And now we're ready to set the valve body on. This can be a challenge for some people. My advice is leave the tensioner on, but you are more than welcome to take the tensioner off. I think it helps. So with our balls glued in there, not going anywhere, and our linkage hanging out, we are going to place the valve body down in this orientation. This is why I like the tensioner. It rests, I can walk around the unit, twist the valve into position, pull the linkage up, gently lift the valve body, slide the linkage shaft in, push it back, and now what I'm ready for is a firm, simple, straight push down. That way I don't tear the gasket and everything flows very smoothly and freely. because you definitely don't want to be rough putting this around. That gasket paper isn't going to take a whole lot. I thread a bolt just to hold it down, keep that tensioner in place, and then we finish it off. Pressure manifold switch. If your car does not recognize what gear it's in, or you have lower gears that are acting funny, that are not available, sometimes drive's not available, intermittent, going back into a gear. So in other words, your gear, let's say D3 will work as soon as I shift up to D4 and then put it back to D3, it won't work. That is an instance in a faulty pressure manifold switch. The other part to that is the temperature sensor for your vehicle and the transmission is right here. You will usually throw codes for this. And the problem is typically as simple as it sounds. Something I didn't really go over in the valve body video, but hey, this was a lot of info and I appreciate you guys bearing with me. Another common mistake people make, and probably the last one I get to talk about today, is these 3 bolts here. These 3 long 8mm. This is where they must go. There is no other place for them. If you put them in a different place where one of these 10mm go, you will lock down the sun shell. And if you're lucky, it might shear off the tip of the bolt and you'll keep going and it'll go in the pan and never be heard from again. It'll be fine. If you're one of the many uncommonly lucky folk, you will only have second, fourth, and reverse because it will be forcefully holding that sun shell the entire time. So now what we're going to do is just give everything one second. Okay, then we torque everything down at 8 foot-pounds. I have seen sequences and this and that. I kind of just try to work, you know, in diagonals, which is what I also recommend you guys do. I don't think a sequence in this scenario is all that important. So I'm doing my 8mm first. You do your 10s first, don't matter. And we're done. We are all torqued up. The last step would be plugging in your harness. If you leave that unplugged like I was talking about earlier, you probably will have high pressure. That's just how it works. Simply, your harness tab goes under the pressure manifold switch. New harnesses, you will have to show it who's boss and kind of force it into place. They don't like to go where they're supposed to. It's kind of hard also, but a mistake I can see people making. These damn wires are in the way. This is what I'm talking about. The common mistake I see people making is, I suppose you could switch these wires around, but you see how it's not going to go there. You know what I mean? So don't be too scared. Like I said, a lot of people just really try to make you scared. Lock up TCC, tiny amount of grease around that O-ring, and we're gonna plug that down in there. We talked about the TCC earlier. All we're gonna do is just switching tools. Again, 8 foot-pounds. And then we're gonna move on to our PWM solenoid, which is aftermarket. I know it looks weird, but these ones are pretty decent. OEM's ones work too. And this is our 3-2 downshift that I was talking about earlier. And there is, I'm not going to stop the video for this. I finally did forget one piece out of the damn thing. There is a clip that goes here. For video's sake, I know it goes there. I am not going to put it in right now, but to finish it off, put it in. I just don't have it on me and don't feel like running out into the shop for any reason at the moment. So we're gonna say installed. Don't leave it out like this. Don't worry about this thing, guys. This seal lasts for many, many years. What we're gonna do is install our deep filter. Give it a bop, just like that, for our deep OEM pan. This gasket only goes on one way. Try to line it up to the best of your ability. And our OEM deep pan. I think I have a couple bolts here. We're just going to shove 2 bolts in for demonstration purposes, 1 in each corner. But you would have 16 bolts. If your pan doesn't quite go on, move it around a little bit. Your filter is probably just enough out of place because there is a certain spot for it. Let's give these a quick tighten. Shove all that aside. There you have it, everybody. There's our OEM fresh built unit. One last thing to check before we close up for the day. It's going to turn like this and make that squeaky noise counterclockwise. Okay, that's normal. What we should have, if you've done clearances and everything right, bushings and bearings, to the best of your ability, we clockwise should have a shaft that is smooth, firm, a little resistance, and turns by itself with minimal effort. Okay, this is how you build a transmission. At the same time, the front should virtually do the same thing. It should not move the output shaft if it was done properly. If it does move the output shaft, that's okay. It just means things are a little tighter than they should be, but if it's too tight, you won't be able to move this at all. Pull in and out on it. End plate isn't real critical like the 4L80 or 400 in this. Mine's pretty much right on the money at probably 5 thousandths or something like that. It's, again, it wasn't real critical. So here we are, and I hope you guys learned something. I hope you enjoyed this series and you can take something away from it, whether you're a first timer or an experienced professional or just stuck in a garage with a vehicle that's giving you problems that you don't want anymore. What unit wouldn't be complete on our perfect OEM unit in all of her glory here without the good old signature? Take a little pride in your work, guys. Stay tuned for this 2024 season. We are finally going to get out of this office. We're going to do some more fun stuff this year and focus a lot more on racing and getting out there on the tracks and on the street for you guys, just showing what our products that we've built in this room and in another room for so many years can actually do. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. Like and subscribe and join us in 2024. We got a whole lot coming.